My name is Marcos, and if you are also over 50, I need you to hear something that took me years of expensive, uncomfortable lessons to fully understand. The smartest, most financially resilient people I know, the ones genuinely thriving past 60, not performing the appearance of thriving, almost none of them have significant money sitting in a traditional savings account. Not because they are careless with their capital, not because they overspend in retirement, but because they figured out something that most of us were never honestly taught. Keeping large sums of money in a savings account after 60 is not a conservative strategy. It is a slow, quiet form of financial self-destruction dressed up in the language of responsibility. And the system you trusted your entire life built it that way on purpose. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Because everything you were taught by your parents, by your bank manager, by decades of financial media, told you that saving was the goal, that the number in your savings account was the truest measure of your preparedness, that the higher that number climbed, the safer your future became. For decades, that belief kept you disciplined. It kept you adding to that account year after year through raises, bonuses, and relentless self-denial. It gave you a sense of progress, a sense of doing the right thing. And I'm not here to tell you that the habit of saving was wrong. The act of deferring immediate gratification for future security is one of the most powerful financial habits a human being can develop. But there is a critical, devastating difference between building capital and parking it in an account designed to quietly erode your purchasing power while enriching the institution that holds it. That difference is what most people never stop to examine. And that difference is what we are going to walk through right now. Let me give you the hard number first, because this conversation deserves honesty more than reassurance. The average savings account pays somewhere between 0.5 and 1% annually. Real inflation, not the politically softened figure in official statistics, but the inflation hitting what you actually buy, groceries, healthcare premiums, utilities, property taxes, home maintenance, runs between 4 and 8% for a household over 60. Do the arithmetic. $100,000 sitting in a savings account is losing somewhere between $3,000 and $7,000 of purchasing power every single year. Not in a market crash, not in a fraud, just sitting there quietly while your bank uses your capital to generate returns 10 to 20 times larger than what they are paying you. And then they call it safety. They call it prudent financial planning. I understand completely how you arrived at this place. I walked this same road. For most of my adult life, I did exactly what I was supposed to do. I showed up. I performed. I saved a portion of everything I earned and deposited it where a bank officer assured me it was appropriate for my risk profile. I deferred vacations, deferred experiences, deferred the version of myself I had always intended to become, because there was always one more year of preparation before the real life could begin. One more year of building the nest egg large enough to feel safe. One more year of playing by the rules of a system designed not around my financial freedom, but around my continued financial participation. And when I finally stopped to look at what decades of obedience had actually produced, the answer was uncomfortable. The number in the account existed, but the life I had been postponing was still postponed. Before I go further, I need to stop and tell you something directly. Over the past several months, I've received more messages than I can count, from people in their late 50s, in their 60s, in their 70s, asking me the same fundamental question. Not just what is broken about the traditional retirement model, but what to do instead. They want more than concepts. They want a complete, structured resource they can actually apply, a framework built specifically for someone in our stage of life, with our specific constraints, our timeline, and our definition of what a secure and meaningful life actually requires. For a long time, I was hesitant to put something like that together because I believe real financial transformation cannot be rushed or packaged superficially.
But after so many of those messages, after so many conversations that made clear how urgently people needed this, I finally did it. I put together a complete manual.
Everything I know about how to build and preserve real wealth after the age of 60, organized clearly, practically, and in the detail it deserves. It covers the decisions that matter most, the structural mistakes that quietly destroy wealth at this stage, and the specific frameworks that actually work for someone who has already built the foundation and now needs to deploy it intelligently. If you are serious about what we are discussing right now, if this is not simply something interesting to watch but something you genuinely intend to act on, I want you to go to the description of this video right now and click the first link. That is where you will find it. Do not defer this. The manual is where your next real step begins. Now let me tell you what the smartest retirees I know actually understood, and why the savings account trap is more dangerous than the interest rate alone suggests. The deeper problem is not the low yield. You can see the yield number. You can calculate the damage. What is far harder to see, and therefore far more destructive, is the psychological role the savings account plays in your mind. That number sitting there, visible, accessible, growing marginally each month, creates a feeling of control. And the feeling of control is one of the most potent sedatives available to a human being confronting the uncertainty of the second half of life. It quiets the anxiety. It whispers that you have done enough. It allows you to avoid the harder work of actually deploying your capital in ways that generate real returns. The savings account is not just a financial trap. It is a deeply psychological one. And the institutions that created it understand this mechanism perfectly. The people I have observed thriving financially past 60 share a quality that took me a long time to name precisely. They are comfortable with productive discomfort. They understand that money sitting still is not money being preserved. It is money surrendering its value to inflation in slow motion. They do not measure their financial security by the size of a single liquid pool. They measure it by the income their assets generate, the resilience of their portfolio across multiple categories, and the independence their financial architecture gives them from any single institution or market event. They think in systems, not in balances. Let me explain the specific risk that makes this so urgent for people in our stage of life. It has a name that almost nobody outside of professional finance discusses openly: sequence of returns risk. Here is what it means in plain language. Two people can retire with identical portfolio sizes and earn identical average annual returns over 20 years, yet end up with completely different outcomes, one maintaining wealth, the other running out of money entirely, based on nothing more than the order in which those returns occur. If your portfolio drops 30% in the first 3 years of retirement while you are simultaneously drawing income from it, you are selling assets at the bottom. You permanently reduce the number of units available to recover when the market rebounds. The damage from a bad early sequence is almost irreversible, even if the portfolio eventually recovers on paper. This is why the famous 4% rule, withdraw 4% of your portfolio annually and never run out of money, is dangerously incomplete for anyone retiring today. That rule was developed in the 1990s using specific historical data and a 30-year horizon. In a world where retirements now routinely extend 40 years, where real inflation consistently outpaces official figures, and where bond yields have been structurally distorted for decades, 4% applied blindly to a single lump sum is not a safety net. For many people, it is a quiet countdown. The framework that genuinely works, the one I have observed in the most financially resilient retirements I know, I call the income layer approach. The core principle is this: instead of building one large pool of capital and drawing it down gradually, you construct your finances in 3 distinct layers, each serving a specific purpose and covering a specific time horizon. The first layer is your liquidity buffer, cash covering 12 to 24 months of real living expenses, not more than that. enough to absorb any market disruption without being forced to sell investments at an unfavorable price, but not so large that you are sacrificing years of purchasing power on idle capital. This is the only role cash should play in your financial architecture after 60, not as a wealth vehicle, as a precision buffer between your income-generating assets and your daily life. The second layer is your income layer, assets that generate predictable recurring cash flow regardless of what markets are doing. Dividend-paying equities with documented track records of maintaining distributions through economic cycles. Income-generating real estate in resilient markets with reliable tenancy. Structured arrangements where you occupy the role of lender, earning the spread rather than paying it. The principle underlying all of these is identical. You are not drawing down principal to fund your life. You are living off the yield your capital generates while the principal remains intact. As long as that income continues to flow, sequence of returns risk becomes essentially irrelevant. You are never forced to sell assets under duress. The third layer is your growth layer, capital committed to assets you will not need for a minimum of 7 to 10 years. Equity exposure, quality long-term holdings, and inflation-protected instruments that can absorb volatility precisely because your income layer and liquidity buffer mean you will never be forced to liquidate them at the wrong moment. When these three layers are structurally separated, market turbulence stops feeling like a personal emergency. It becomes something you can observe with patience rather than panic. I want to address directly the thought I know is present for many people right now. The thought that says this framework sounds reasonable, but the numbers may not work for me. I want to be honest with you. Any serious wealth architecture requires some capital foundation, but the threshold is almost always substantially lower than people fear. The differentiating factor is not the size of the starting capital. It is the clarity and discipline of the architecture applied to it. What consistently destroys retirement finances is not insufficient capital. It is the absence of any deliberate structure at all, the gap between having accumulated money and having deployed it with genuine intention. People spend 30 years building capital and 30 minutes deciding what to do with it. They follow the path of least resistance, whatever the bank recommends, whatever the default option is, whatever the neighbor did. And then they spend a decade watching it fail to sustain the life they planned. Let me speak candidly about financial advisors because this conversation demands it. The advisory industry carries a structural conflict of interest that is not hidden. It is simply not discussed plainly enough. Most advisors are compensated based on products sold, assets under management, or transaction volume. Their income is tied to your participation, not your outcome. This is not a conspiracy, and many advisors genuinely want to help. It is a systemic misalignment that produces predictable results. The advice most consistently given, diversify broadly, hold long, withdraw 4%, is calibrated for the average outcome, which means it is optimized for nobody specifically. Before you trust any professional with capital representing decades of your life, ask them directly, how are you compensated? Are you a fiduciary? What products generate higher fees for you when you recommend them? A professional with real integrity answers these questions clearly. Anyone who deflects or minimizes them is giving you more valuable information than anything on their proposal. There is a dimension of this that rarely gets spoken about clearly, and it matters more than any interest rate. The savings account trap is not only financial, it is deeply human. The reason so many people over 60 hold capital idle, not by strategy but by paralysis, is that they spent decades inside a belief system that equated security with accumulation. More in the account meant more safety, and more safety meant more permission to eventually live the life they had been promising themselves. So the life kept getting deferred. The plan waited for the number to feel large enough. The creative work, the move, the new chapter, all of it suspended in a future that always needed one more year of preparation to justify. What I have observed is that the people who keep waiting for the perfect conditions never find them. Time moves forward without them. The account grew. The years passed, and the version of themselves they had always intended to become remained permanently in the future. The most expensive cost of financial paralysis is never captured on any balance sheet. The retirees I genuinely respect are not the ones with the largest balances. They are the ones who understood that wealth is not a destination you reach when the number finally feels sufficient. Wealth is the architecture that gives you the freedom to build and live on your own terms right now, not in some perpetually postponed future. They stopped treating the second half of their lives as a period of careful reduction and started treating it as the most strategically significant financial period they had ever entered, because it is. The decisions made in the first 5 years after 60 compound for the next 25 to 30 years. The structure you build or fail to build in this window determines the difference between genuine financial independence and quiet, incremental dependency. If you are still holding the majority of your capital in a savings account because it feels like the responsible choice, here's the truth you deserve to hear. The risk is not in deploying your capital with intention. The risk is in leaving it exactly where it is, watching inflation convert your decades of work into a smaller and smaller claim on the life you built toward. The savings account is not protecting you. It is protecting your bank's lending margin. Every year you leave capital there, you are subsidizing an institution while collecting the minimum it can legally justify paying you. That is not a strategy. That is an absence of one. Your life at 60 is not a wind down. For the people I know who took their financial architecture seriously in their early 60s, it was the most productive and genuinely free decade of their entire lives. Not because they worked harder, because they finally stopped working for a system and started directing capital they had spent a lifetime earning in ways that served them rather than the institutions that had always benefited most from their passivity. That clarity is available to you. It does not require perfect starting conditions. It requires exactly what you already have: decades of hard-won experience, a foundation of capital, and the willingness to stop treating your own resources with the same lack of intention the system always hoped you would maintain. The manual I mentioned, the one waiting for you at the first link in the description, is where everything we covered today lives in full, actionable detail. The complete income layer framework with the specific steps to build it from where you are right now. The structural mistakes that destroy wealth quietly at this stage, not dramatic failures, but compounding errors that take years to become visible and far longer to reverse. The exact questions to ask before trusting any professional with your capital, and the framework for making the most important financial decisions of the next 5 years with clarity instead of anxiety. If you have watched this far, you are not someone who is content with the system's default. Go to the description, click the first link. Stop treating your own future the way the system trained you to treat everything that truly matters, with patience that slowly becomes postponement. The capital you have right now, deployed with real intention in the right architecture, is enough to build something genuinely different, but only if you stop waiting and start building.